All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome. I'm Karen Hawks, a post-secondary counselor at Aspen High School here in Aspen, Colorado, where it snowed a little bit this afternoon. What do you know? On behalf of the Rocky Mountain College Night Planning Committee, I want to welcome you to the panel session titled A Case for the Liberal Arts, Myth versus Reality. Tonight, I'm thrilled to welcome to our panel Madison Hollenbeck from Whitman College, Sebastian Brown from University of Redlands, Grace Lloyd from Grinnell College, and Michaela Nip from Trinity University. I'm going to turn things over to Michaela to moderate this session. I'll come back at the end to let you know how to find the Zoom rooms for all the admissions counselors. For any of you that have questions, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A, and Michaela and I will try to monitor that to make sure they get answered. So enjoy this session, and I'll see you before it ends.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We know we only have a brief amount of time together, so we want to definitely dive in and get started. But again, my name is Michaela Nip. I'm an assistant director of admissions at Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas. I am stationed in San Antonio. It was 90 degrees here today, so it did not snow, but I have the absolute privilege of working with students from Colorado. So I'm really excited to be here. We are going to probably dive in with some questions that we've prepared, but certainly welcome your questions as well. And before we get started, I definitely want my colleagues to introduce themselves too, so that you know who's in the room today and you have a better idea of who is answering some of your questions. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues. Madison, do you want to kick us off with a brief introduction?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Madison Hollenbeck. I use she, her pronouns. I am an associate director of admission at Whitman College. We are located in Walla Walla, Washington, the only town so nicely named it twice. And like I think most of my colleagues, I work with all of our students that come from the great state of Colorado. And so I really appreciate you all being here, and I look forward to answering lots of great questions.
Great. Sebastian, do you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sebastian Brown. I am an admissions counselor here at the University of Redlands in Southern California, kind of in between LA and the mountains. I also work with all of our Colorado students, and I'm actually a Colorado native. So went to Cherry Creek High School down in Denver and came here to Redlands. So I've only really lived two places my entire life, but when you find a good thing, you definitely want to stay. I use he, him pronouns as well.
All right, and Grace, do you want to bring us home?
Yeah, of course. So hello, everyone. My name is Grace Lloyd. I'm a senior assistant director of admission at Grinnell College, a small private liberal arts college located in Iowa. I am not from Colorado, but I also, like everyone else, represent the great state of Colorado. And yeah, I'm really excited to be able to talk about the liberal arts with all of you today.
So to get us started, and again, if you do have questions, you can drop those into the Q&A. But our first question that I'm going to throw to our panelists is, what even is a liberal arts education, and what does that encompass, and how might that be different from other types of institutions?
I mean, I guess I can start off. I bet we'll all build on each other, right? I think one of the defining features of a liberal arts education is the idea of basically like having a community of people that are living and learning together in really diving into the idea of inquiry-based learning. So a lot of times at liberal arts colleges, you'll find small class sizes, right? Very small classrooms, or maybe Harkness tables, if you're familiar with that term, where a round table format where the professor is even a part of the discussion sitting at the table just like a fellow student. So it's definitely the type of learning for students that want to have a voice and a name and a face in the classroom and not be anonymous. Our schools typically do not have lecture style courses, and they're really about asking why and making sure that you are not just sitting there and like receiving information, but actually engaging with that information. And so what we call it is discussion-based and inquiry-based learning. And so that's really one of the big hallmarks of the liberal arts, right? You never just take an answer for granted. You ask why that, and then you push further. And I think that's something that can be really beautiful. So, some students, I will say, thrive in very different environments. It's really good to know what's best for you. Maybe you like a larger lecture hall, but I know for myself, I attended Grinnell, graduated in 2016. For me, it was really important to have a small classroom environment because I know that that's the kind of environment that I thrive in. And so if that's you, consider the liberal arts. And I'll let Madison or Sebastian chime in because there's a lot also to be said just about the living part of the liberal arts community as well.
Yeah, I definitely echo that. And I think an important thing for me with the liberal arts is that students don't just study one specific topic. They really start to understand the world for the much bigger and more complex place that it is. And the liberal arts, of course, any student that's curious could go and do a Google search or, hey, what about this? But the liberal arts as a structure really helps foster that. So many times liberal arts schools, you'll have students that are double majoring, or their major is kind of a more interdisciplinary program that, kind of by design, students will mix and match majors and minors to encompass a lot of different things that they might be interested in. Just because thanks. Just because like you're studying physics doesn't mean you only have to ever be interested in the sciences. There could be a really interesting relationship between physics and women and gender and sexuality studies. And that is something that our students explore during their 4 years. I think another thing with liberal arts learners is they're lifelong learners. They hardly ever stop with when they get their degree, and they continue to do research and, like Grace said, asks questions and see how things connect.
Sebastian, something that you mentioned was the sciences, right? And I think sometimes there's a misconception that maybe the sciences and the liberal arts don't go hand in hand. So do one of the panelists maybe want to tackle what the sciences or STEM fields might look like at a liberal arts institution?
I'm happy to kind of jump in. Yeah, I think oftentimes you'll hear liberal arts schools talked as like liberal arts, but a lot of us at our core are liberal arts and sciences schools, right? And that means we have pretty robust sciences that students can engage with on campus, ranging from biology to chemistry, physics, biochemistry. It's even if it's not in like the broad name, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist on our campus. And I think oftentimes people also get concerned with, are there going to be research opportunities? And because we're small undergrad focused campus communities, not a tier 1 research university that some great large public institutions are, that doesn't mean that there aren't research opportunities. I actually think sometimes they can be more plentiful on our campuses because you're not competing against graduate students or teaching assistants. You're in classes with your professors that are also doing their research. And so, they know your name, you know their name, and you're able to get connected for those research. But, speaking from our campus, about a third of our students will do the harder natural sciences. And I think that's pretty common. Most liberal arts schools will probably tell you biology is one of the biggest departments that they have on their campuses. And that is something that is a common thread. And so, if you're looking at going into medical school or going into a hard science, you can find that on pretty much on all of our campuses, and with a lot of resources and research opportunities for you to explore. And so I think oftentimes it's a misconception that we're all based in humanities, and you will definitely take humanities classes on our institution's campuses, but you can also have the opportunity to pursue some of the hard and natural sciences as well.
Yeah, I'll follow that. I studied biology here at Redlands, and I think you certainly get your fair share of those tough, science academic courses and are prepared for research. But there's also something to say about just a quantitative level of thinking, right? Just because you study biology doesn't mean you have to go and be a doctor. At some point in the future, you may bring that, kind of more analysis or critical thinking lens. And something I tell a lot of our folks when they come and visit campus is, realistically, in this day and age, employers are looking for the most well-rounded, students or employees. You could be the world's greatest computer scientist in coding, but if you can't share your knowledge to other human beings, you need to be able to talk to humans as well as you can talk to computers. And that is kind of what the liberal arts encompasses, or that you have an engineer who understands community service or the political implications of a bridge that they're going to build, right? And seeing now you're designing that with that in mind, which again, just is a lot more impactful, I think, for our students.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add, because I think you guys hit it so well already, is just to kind of harp on that. We are mostly undergraduate institutions, and so you're getting to work with professors in your very first year. For like Grinnell, for example, no TAs, and I'm sure that there's few, if any, TAs at other liberal arts colleges, right? And so what that means is that you build those relationships with your professors in your first year. You have research opportunities from your first year as a student. Whereas, sometimes at other institutions, you might have to wait, right? Or compete against master's and PhD students. And so that is a really nice benefit of being able to start right away, so to speak, get that experience, put that, both on your resume, but also be able to build these relationships with professors who will be writing your recommendations for you. And that's also very important. That's why oftentimes at liberal arts colleges, we have really high rates of PhD production, students going to doctorate programs or master's programs for STEM degrees, and also like very high rates of med school and engineering programs and things like that, even as liberal arts colleges. Part of that, I think, is just because of the early start to getting that experience, the resources that we have that are available as a first year, and then also those relationships with professors who can write a really solid recommendation for you because they've known you for so long. So that's my only other plug.
That was actually one of the questions I was going to ask is, will your professor know who you are? And I think we can unanimously say, absolutely. It's a little hard to disappear into the background at a liberal arts institution, which kind of leads me to the next question, which is, does your campus ever maybe feel too small? Like, especially if our students are coming from high schools that might be the same size or bigger, and just that campus community feel. So do campuses ever feel small at liberal arts colleges?
I oftentimes talk, kind of tackle this question in like a twofold. I think college campuses, just have more space like geographically than high school campuses, right? Like, and that seems so silly to like bring up, but like, even if your campus is, or we might be smaller than your high school, like we have so much more space that it feels a lot bigger, and you're not constant, like you'll run into people, but you also have that space to just like have your own space as well, which I do think is a little bit different than like that high school. But also I oftentimes talk about like there's so many benefits to the small campus. You're constantly running into people, the unintentional, like you run into your best friend all the time, but you also don't have the divide in college as much as you do in high school between grades. And I think that can often be a really big thing that you're going to, like, as a first year on our campus, you're going to have friends that are sophomores, juniors, and seniors, where in high school, you're a little bit more like siloed into your class. If you're a senior, you're hanging out with mostly seniors, unless, there might be a little one-offs here and there, but in college, you're taking classes with, seniors that are taking an intro level, like psychology course, or you're going to be in a club where there's upperclassmen that you're going to become really good friends with. You don't really see a divide between like first years and sophomores and juniors. And so it feels a lot bigger. There's a lot more people to meet than I think you have the opportunity to in like high school in a lot of ways, just because it is kind of so segmented. And so I oftentimes talk about, like, even if it's a smaller than your high school community, like you're still going to have so many fresh and new faces, but it's going to be that tight enough community that there's always going to be someone looking out for you. And so I think it's a really nice balance for a lot of students.
Yeah, I love talking about exactly what you said, Madison, because yes, like maybe you go to a school with 2,000 students. Are you all in one building? Maybe two buildings. Our campuses probably have like 40 plus buildings on them, right? Like it is so different to be able to be spread across an entire campus. You don't see people every day, but it's still small, right? And I just think that is the perfect balance. And what's great also is thinking about it like with your high school experience too, right? New students come in every year. You're meeting constantly new people. And then the last thing I want to say also is just diversity. I think diversity at liberal arts colleges is really, really incredible. And for example, like at Grinnell, we have 1,700 students, but like 25% of our students are domestic students of color, 20% are international. Oftentimes, like I'm sure it's the same with Whitman, who I've traveled with internationally actually, and Redlands and Trinity, right? Like our institutions have populations of students coming from everywhere. But being in a small place, it means that you have to interact with those other people, those people that are different from you. And that's, I think, really beautiful. That's part of what makes the community so unique, because you're meeting people that you might never have met otherwise. And if you had gone to a school where, everybody is from the same high school, it can change, the dynamic. You're not necessarily broadening yourself in the same ways. And so our schools really, really push that idea of, you're learning from your peers, maybe just as much as you are from your professors. And that's a really important component that I think is what also makes it feel much less small, to have students coming from all over the United States, all over the world, and being in your classroom. So.
Yeah, the one thing I've found with a lot of liberal arts schools, which was not the case when I was first kind of looking around, is small school doesn't have to mean small opportunities. It has amazed me. I actually haven't left Redlands since I got here. Did 4 years straight through, now work in admissions, and honestly can say I haven't met a student that's not involved in at least a couple things outside of their classrooms. And I know most schools can say that. What I found with a lot of, Madison mentioned like large tier 1 state schools, you kind of get one thing that you get to focus on. If you want to study abroad, maybe you get that opportunity. But if you also want to be an athlete, chances are realistically, you probably do not get to do both, let alone something in the sciences. And at smaller, liberal arts colleges, oftentimes you can do all of those things, plus have a job on campus or join a Greek organization. You can really do a lot more because the opportunities are there. And that's something I think is also really important, is not only the academic flexibility, but also the social. Grace, you mentioned just having upperclassmen that live on campus, more frequently, and that level of leadership and mentorship that comes with that is also important to the social atmosphere.
Sebastian, I'm not sure if you know this, but you were reading the Q&A mind, and you were already answering a question that was in the chat about what does social life even look like at a small school versus a big school. And I think everyone, you guys really hit the nail on the head. I think a lot of students that go to liberal arts colleges tend to be these big fish in a small pond, right? And they're able to take advantage of these incredible opportunities and be involved in a lot of different things and dabble around. So we were already tackling that already, which is great. A question that came into the chat, I think it's kind of interesting. So I'm curious what your perspective is going to be on this. But are there differences in your perspective of an interdisciplinary studies degree or a liberal arts degree? And how would you view those maybe being slightly distinct different things? And if there are benefits to those types of degree paths?
I can answer this one. Redlands, so coming to Redlands, you come in undecided or undeclared, and you get to declare your major once you're here. We offer, over 40 programs of study. So I think the liberal arts, again, by structure, by design, really encourages students to say, well, I'm the most passionate about business or biology or music, and use that as a central focus. But then the liberal arts allows you to kind of think about that in different contexts. And that's why we have you study, the humanities, biology and history and business and history, still talking about history, but in very different contexts. As far as interdisciplinary studies, it's a bit more of like, instead of reading in between the lines of how those cross. So here at Redlands, we actually have an interdisciplinary program called the Johnston Center, and students effectively design their own major. So I'll give you a super quick example. We had a student who knew he wanted to work for NASA, but was not interested in being an engineer or an astronaut. He really had a passion for political science and law. So as a Johnston student, he did political science, public policy, international relations, economics, astronomy, and physics, kind of how they all interrelated together. And those students get to kind of, in a fun way, name their degrees. So his degree from Redlands is legitimately in astropolitics. So not just political science with a liberal arts emphasis, it was really something slightly different. That's a great question to ask. If you know you really want something interdisciplinary, go out and find it. The liberal arts tends to be a little bit more general, I would say, in their structure.
And branching off of that a little bit, I think it's maybe a common idea that with a liberal arts education, you probably will be taking quite a few classes outside of your area of study. Can you maybe speak to that? Anyone, Madison or Grace or Sebastian, on what the curriculum could look like when you're encouraged to dabble outside of your intended major or minor?
Yeah, I would say typically liberal arts for the most part have basically kind of take your credits or your curriculum and kind of divide it into thirds, more or less. And so it's kind of, if you look at a pie chart, about a third will go towards your major. Most of us don't make you declare your major until kind of probably once you're on campus, most likely during your sophomore year, because we think that time and space for that exploration is really important. Most of us offer tons more classes on our campuses than you'll ever have access to in high school. And so we want you to have time to dive into areas that maybe you haven't had time or opportunities to take in high school. And I think that's where oftentimes liberal arts will have about a third of credits that will go towards your distribution requirements. Each school does this a little bit differently in how they kind of format it in structure, but typically we'll ask that you take classes in hard sciences or natural sciences, humanities, in the fine arts, in some kind of like language or a class taught from a different cultural perspective. Ours is called cultural pluralism on campus. We'll ask that you take like a quantitative analysis class, and then usually a class in humanities. And so basically you'll find that these tend to be pretty open-ended. We want you to choose classes in these areas that like pique your interest, that you're interested in, but we also want to make sure that we are encouraging you and kind of pushing you outside your comfort zone to take those classes in areas that maybe might not always be your natural inclination to take. And so we really want to make sure that you are having that time to explore, to have that kind of breadth of courses as well, but making sure again that you still have say kind of over some of the classes that you're taking, because that is one of the biggest perks about college. And so that's kind of where third will go. And that's really where kind of that interdisciplinary approach, pulling from different points of views. We oftentimes talk about, I think Sebastian nailed it on the head, but like your major is oftentimes a theme or like a thread that connects all the different classes that you're taking on campus with kind of that lens overarching. But then you kind of have that last third that I always call it like the leftover bucket. And like I said, each school kind of does it different, but it's like the general electives, classes that you want to take just because they sound cool. It's oftentimes where maybe study abroad might fall into if it doesn't fit into the first two categories. And I would say we all have really great kind of study abroad experiences that you can take advantage of. It's maybe where a second major might fall in, or minor, double minor, any kind of combination. Oftentimes we want to like provide the like structure, but we want you to make your 4 years on campus kind of what you would like. And so I think that's kind of how we kind of approach kind of that breadth while still getting depth in the area of interest that you're most interested in or passionate about.
Yeah, and I'll just add really quickly that everybody tuning in, if you're curious about like what classes are required by different schools that are outside of the major, like required as the core curriculum or the general education requirements or distribution requirements, they're all on the websites. So please check those out, and also keep an eye out. And I'm just going to do a quick plug for open curriculums. It's a really awesome style of curriculum. It's not for everyone because it can be a little daunting to have no restrictions in the classes that you take. And so there are a handful, about 30 or 40, I believe, schools that offer an open curriculum. Grinnell offers something modeled off of that, where there's only one class outside of your major that you're required to take. There are other schools that offer this too. And so there's all different spectrums of requirements is what I'm trying to say, right? There's some schools where a third of your classes are required outside your major and, prescribed. There's some that say, we just have themes we want you to hit on. And so just check out websites and really explore, because it's really fun to see how different schools approach their curriculum styles. It's really fun.
Yeah, I'll add quickly, at a lot of schools, you also have different options. So most degree programs will either offer a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science. And so, for example, if you did a Bachelor of Science in biology, you're taking a few more courses that are required towards the sciences, maybe an extra math or calculus course, physics, and less of your foreign language or that music class that you take. Whereas a Bachelor of Arts, usually requires a minor, or you have a bit more of, like Madison mentioned, some of those additional, more well-rounded requirements. So if you still knew that you really wanted to focus more on something, you could opt for the Bachelor of Science, or you could, be a bit more well-rounded with the Bachelor of Arts and double major or something like that.
Every time I think about, the liberal arts education, I always think of that phrase, jack of all trades, master of none. It's actually a longer phrase than that people don't know as often, but it's actually jack of all trades, master of none, but better than a master of one. And I always think of a liberal arts education when I think of that phrase, because you're going to be a jack of all trades. You're going to be well-rounded and be able to speak to a lot of different disciplines, but also have a lot of depth of knowledge in your one area of study. I know a question that I get asked quite often, I'm sure you guys do too, my colleagues on this panel, is about being employable afterwards, especially with having some of that more general knowledge base. And that was actually a question that came into the chat actually about if you are in a really specific area or maybe more general, are you employable? So let's talk maybe a little bit about that and about getting jobs after graduating from a liberal arts education.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to address in the chat. I was like, okay, so you've got a degree in astropolitics. What do you do with that? I'll be honest, we have some students that get pretty interesting, things that they end up declaring their majors. There was one, of course, they hated this person at graduation because their whole degree title is like standing on the shoulders of giants, using mathematics, physics, and astronomy to calculate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, okay, well, putting that on your resume, probably should have thought that through a little bit beforehand. The astropolitics individual is currently a lobbyist for NASA in Washington, D.C. So yes, being that specific can really help you. Now, if you wanted to do something that wasn't necessarily astro or politics, are you kind of limiting yourself? I think that's a great question. I think something that liberal arts students and just with career preparation need advice with or need to be mindful of is just how they market themselves upon graduation. What I often tell students when they're leaving Redlands is, we're not Stanford, we're not Harvard, we're not Yale. You're not sitting on the laurels of the school that you're coming from to float to the top of a resume stack. It's your involvements and the way that you talk about yourself and your experiences in your cover letter that show that you're a much more kind of intricate and unique individual that has a lot of different skill sets than just, I went to Harvard and that's going to speak for myself. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And again, all of our schools have wonderful Office of Career and Professional Developments that help you with those kinds of things. And how do you explain how your study abroad experience actually gave you a sense of leadership, right, or something like that. And that's a really marketable skill for a lot of graduates.
Yeah, I was just going to say like that individualized, focus that our campuses talk about, like just, like we've been talking about where your professors, people, and like Sebastian said, you also know the people in the careers office. You have people that are going to be working with you from as early as your first year if you want to start thinking about internships, jobs, how to format a resume, networking opportunities, job shadowing. Small liberal arts colleges have incredible alumni networks because it's just such a unique experience to go to one, right? Our alums actively want to have fellow alums or future alums or students or whatever working for them, interning for them. And so we all have different networks that are available. And so having access to that really individualized focus that is a part of the liberal arts, I think is actually a benefit when it comes to finding a job or getting into grad school, because again, you have people that know you and are writing great recommendations. You have alums that don't even know you yet, but they want to hire you. And then you have career center people that are working actively with you to make sure you have a very strong resume, to make sure that, like our schools offer everything from like interview workshops where they'll like record you or interview you and then tell you what you did right and wrong. It can be stressful, but that's stuff that we can do. We have the time and resources to be able to spend that on our students. And I think that's really notable too. Sorry for the motorcycle. There's always a motorcycle when I unmute. So
I was also going to add on, I think Sebastian might have mentioned earlier, but like I think people are looking for well-rounded individuals. No matter what job you go into, you're going to have to be able to discuss and like relay what you're talking, like what you're researching. You have to be able to write and present a good topic or a proposal. You have to be able to pull from different points of views, because you're never going to just be doing one thing, right? And that's what liberal arts really prepares our students well for, and I think is really marketable, especially in today's society. The statistic I think is also like people will have 4 different careers in a lifetime, not just like jobs, but like different careers. And so the liberal arts education prepares you for that flexibility and adaptability with this broad-based kind of learning and interdisciplinary approach. So you might think that you want to go into a specific field like, biology research, but then you're like, no, I want to like totally change this, and I want to start and work in like marketing. And then, but you have those skills and found that foundation to fall back on. And I think that's what a lot of people are now looking for. I oftentimes talk about like, also like, if you would have thought back, I don't know, 10, 15 years, did you think social media marketing and managing was going to be a full-time career, right? Now it's in every single business in place, basically every workplace. And so like some of those jobs and careers that you might work in maybe not even exist at this point in time. And so that liberal arts education really allows that kind of flexibility and that foundation, and be able to kind of, I hate to say like fake it till you make it, but basically pull from your like soft skills that's going to let you learn maybe some of the harder skills that you might need for a different career or path than you originally planned. And so I think the liberal arts, especially in like technical fields like medical school and like business, I think are becoming a hotter commodity because of the soft skills, and the way we approach learning allows our students to really grow and adapt quickly in fast moving fields.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Madison. And liberal arts students are really masters at both critical and creative thinking, because they're able to take from all these different places. I'll give you a quick example. One of my friends here is an environmental science major with a minor in something that we have called spatial studies. So it was like mapping and drone flights and kind of very like save the earth and work, out in the woods. Here at Redlands, he happened to take 2 like different public policy and political science classes, and his first job after college was as a climate change analyst. So he's looking at weather patterns and all this stuff, but he worked for a nonprofit, and when they were looking for like a land grant working with the government, he was one of the few people that actually knew how to write that up because he had taken this political science class. And he's in his first year at this organization, and now he's writing legislation that was voted on 2 years ago here in California. And right, like Madison said, not at all what he was maybe intending as an environmental science major, but a pretty nice, useful skill to have in his back pocket for someday when he eventually needed it.
Thank you, guys. We had a question come into the chat that I think is a really interesting question. It's how do you manage at liberal arts colleges to create a diverse environment within small class sizes? And there's a specific example given. I live on a farm and have an agricultural background. How would my unique experience fit into a small class?
I love this question. I think, again, harping on the whole idea of like you have a voice and a personality and a perspective, and it's represented in the classroom because we facilitate those sorts of conversations. You start to realize that everybody is different. Everybody has something that they can bring, a perspective or a piece of their background or identity that they can contribute to a conversation. And you start to learn so much about people because you're just hearing from them on a daily basis in all of these classes. And so I think one of the beautiful things about these small class sizes is that you realize that everybody has something to contribute. And it can be, something from their home life. It can be something from wherever they're coming from. They could be 10 minutes down the street from the school originally. They still have something different that no one else has. And I think that's part of the whole purpose of our types of classroom environments. Just learning that everybody has something. I don't know. I just think it's really beautiful because it's one of those things that you don't always remember when you're just sitting somewhere, right? Like if you're on a subway or something like that, or a train, and you look around, everybody has something that makes them special and makes them different and unique. and hearing it in a classroom environment when you're talking about something. Let's say you're in an education class and you have a student from a small private school in a different country and a student at a large public school in Chicago, and you have someone who was homeschooled, and all of those different perspectives will come out in the classroom. And that is where the real joy of learning comes from having those experiences and having those voices get heard. So I think the small classes really help just facilitate the realization that there is diversity in so many different ways represented in all the different people that are around us. So.
And I think just to add to that, that our professors really try to facilitate that as well. This has been talked about a few times about how your professors actually know who you are. And I think that when you're in a small classroom environment, the professors can help facilitate those conversations. And I remember, I'm actually a graduate of Trinity as well, but I remember being in classrooms and there would be a syllabus in front of us, and the conversation would just go a different direction. A student brought up a question that maybe the professor didn't have an answer to or needed to dig into deeper, or a student brought up a perspective that hadn't been thought about. And all of a sudden the class was going in a completely different direction, all because of that. And the professor was open to it. They weren't upset that it didn't go the way they wanted. They were open to the conversation and open to it being kind of a learning opportunity and kind of changing the direction of the class. So thank you, Grace, for that. And I think our time is up. I see Karen has joined us back on the call. So I think our time is coming to a conclusion. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists, for chatting a little bit more about the liberal arts education.
And I want to thank Michaela, Madison, Grace, and Sebastian so much. You guys are rock stars, and you really communicated so well the opportunities that a liberal arts education provides. I myself am a graduate from a liberal arts institution. I majored in Russian. What was I going to do with that? And I've had 4 really interesting and distinctly different careers. So yes, you can have a wonderfully challenging and wonderful life with a liberal arts education. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. I do encourage you to visit with the reps in their individual Zoom rooms. You will find their individual Zoom links if you go back to the original registration page, which is at strivescan.com/CO 2021. And I know they'll be really happy to have you pop in and ask your questions. And I also really do recommend you reach out as you begin your college research. Madison, Sebastian, Grace, Michaela, and the other reps are there for you. And they're looking for students like you. So don't be shy and do reach out. So thank you for the great conversation. Enjoy your breakout rooms, and thank you again all so much.
Thank you.